about my wife. I am talking to Gavin Stener of 67 Designs today. Thank you for coming on.
Happy
We've
to
been
be here.
talking back and forth for a few weeks. We just met each other, but I think your background is fascinating in the history of everything you do. 67 Designs, if you go to the website right now, you're going to see a lot of basically like off-road truck parts, phone mounts, like things that are built in the US, sold in the US. But that is not where you started your career.
Mhm.
You're from the UK, right?
Originally born in the UK, part of the time in Australia, back to the UK, and came to Dallas, Texas 31 years ago almost.
What was that like? I mean, just culturally, before we get into manufacturing and any of
Yeah.
that, like Dallas is, a lot of people come from like UK to New York, which can be a little easier maybe, but Dallas is that's a totally different culture.
When I mentioned about the Australia component, the such formative years, the only thing I can tell you, there's only two places in the world I felt at home. One was in Australia, and the other one is in Texas. And immediately when I came here in '94, which was a surprise trip, I traveled around for a week and I went, these are my people.
Is that your Australia time where you got like a truck bug, like overlanding and Land
Yeah, we
Cruisers
did.
and all that stuff?
Yeah, we did that. It was never called that, but that's exactly what the family did. We didn't have an awful lot of money, so it's like bundle the kids up, drive through the night across the red plains. You know, mom and dad would drive. We'd sleep in the back because that was cheaper than a hotel, but we got to see the country. And then, they would try and sleep during the day and trade off. So that was what we did.
It's funny that you have the same bristling that everybody in the industry that works in quote unquote overlanding has with the term overlanding
I
because
do.
it 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 now just denotes like $150,000 pavement
Hmm.
princesses that never
Yep.
actually get beat on, and most of the people from our generation came up from trucks and off-roading and camping and all of that as being
Yep.
like things that were so uh things that you did because you didn't have a lot of money, but you wanted a lot of fun and things that
Yeah.
you would go out and break. But I won't let us go fully into overlanding yet. We will inevitably get into truck stuff by the end of our conversation. But how did you land on manufacturing? What are some of the experiences that you had through your early career of that informed that?
Without a shadow of a doubt, my most formative experiences were, in in Australia as a young kid and standing there at a lathe, at a drill press, and Uncle Fred is insisting on teaching this tiny little kid the basics of how you make things and how you survive and what you do. So, as an engineer, he'd actually ripped out part of a factory and put it into his garage. It was an old, really old. Um, Set of machines that were even belt driven. That's how old it was. I'm not that old, but I'm just saying that's the age of his equipment. So we were on that. Mother was horrified, of course, but Uncle Fred was the one who planted the original. Oh, this is fun. This is almost dangerous. I like it.
You said he was an engineer. What did he work on?
I actually couldn't tell you right now, but he was retired by then. I mean, he's long, long, long gone. I mean, he was retired when he was teaching me, and I'm 57.
So when you came to the US, did you come in over for a job initially, or was it a I got to get into Texas first and then I'll figure it out from there?
No, it definitely wasn't that. I can assure you it wasn't that. Most of the people my age in the UK had this fascination with the United States, and for me, it was always to return home to Australia. That's always where I saw my home. So it was kind of it was a weird set of circumstances. After university, got straight away into ERP software, which is a whole other thing. But I've always been in and around manufacturing, and the Oracle team, were having their butts kicked at the time by a little German company called SAP, and Larry Ellison was feeling, yeah, he had to beef up the team. I joined part of that team when it was really nothing. So a number of us got pulled in, and I was very, very fortunate, and why I'm a great backer of H-1B visas.
Man, we could talk about that. What
Oh yeah.
what was I do actually kind of I'm asking because I want to talk about ERP software a little bit because within modern manufacturing reshoring, what I'm seeing is a lot of these new companies that are standing up, hitting certain amounts of stride, are getting to a point when they're like, wait, I actually do need ERP software and I don't like everything that's there. But culturally,
Mhm.
was this, would you say, in the SAP Oracle fight era that is probably what, late 90s, something like
Actually,
that?
it was 94. I came here in 94. They were getting their butts kicked 92, 93. The leading group, while I'm in Dallas, the leading group that was saving the day in the deals that they were doing was headed up by Ray Lane, who ended up being the president of, for a short while, president of Oracle. They were all guys based out of here. There was Arne Gustafson, Reagan Lancaster. Those guys were taking names, kicking butt, and they were the lead dogs. And actually, when I came here in '94, by the end of that financial year, they'd all gone up. Ray had gone out to the West Coast. Um, and where did the others go? I think Reagan and Arn, I think they went over to I2 Software, which a long history there.
In ERP software, though,
Right.
like in that era, I presume as kind of early SaaS businesses or maybe midlife SaaS businesses, a lot of it was down to sales, relationship building, and things like that. But also in the growth and feature set, like what was were there any lessons that you saw working in that industry now that you think apply to software, ERP software today? Because my sense of it, not as an expert, is that you basically have the old guard. You still have SAPs around, Oracle's
Sure.
around. You have a lot of other God, there's a couple other names that are slipping my mind. There's plenty of vendors that are there,
Hmm.
but the smaller and newer and ideally more nimble manufacturing companies out right now often are just saying that stuff has no utility to me. It's all overblown. Do you feel like that's the case, or
Wow.
do you feel like there's still a lot of value in the old guard ERP offerings for small, medium companies?
You've touched on this is a whole podcast in and itself, really.
Maybe we
Um,
do this. Yeah.
so, well, let me peel back. Let me go back a stage to answer that before um, back into the 1980s and really, really boring stuff. But way back when we were, I mean, they go back onto the mainframe System 36s, AS400s. You already had a lot of compute. It was just more mainframe oriented. And then along came in late 80s, you ended up with a bunch of upstart ERP systems that were actually based on, um, I think the initial one was a DEC PDP-11. And so there was a bunch of DEC equipment. The mini computer came in. So you were actually getting a number of applications, really good companies being developed in the late 80s going into the 90s that were running on those. They were running on SCO Xenix. They were running in Informix, Informix ESQL, SQLC. That's kind of the area that I came in. So 3 days after, my final exam, I was working for one of the top ERP systems companies in the UK, right? So it's had its own identified brand, not the Oracles and SAPs. But one of the things that we were not famous, one of the things that we did very, very well is coming out of the university, which was an old traditional school of engineering in Nottingham in the UK. That still had old guard. It still was carrying on. So we had an entire machining floor. We had old traditional ways of learning, and we had to strip down bills of material. We had to write simulations. We had to program in, robots, pick and place robots. You had to do all of those things. But interspersed with there, you had some professors, typically the younger ones, that were really getting into something from a guy that I think we spoke about in the previous call, was Elia Goldratt and the goal, which is a really, I think there's really only two books. If you're going to be serious about manufacturing, I think there's two really good books. There's Factory Physics, which is extremely chewy, and then you've got the goal. And the goal is something that you can give to every member of your team in any organization. It doesn't even have to be manufacturing. And it's literally, in fact, there's the goal, right?
Yeah. We
So
haven't talked about that on Tool or Die, but I agree 100%. It's not just for people in manufacturing. It's
it's
such a
not.
good way to learn how to approach problems.
It goes to the very heart of why are people coming together in an organization? What is literally the goal? And they wrote such an accessible book. I'll relate that back though in a second to your question about ERP, because you can't get to modern ERP unless you understand many of the lessons that were attempted to be made by Lai Goldratt. So at our university, we had a really young professor who even was at the beginnings of ARPANET, um, was involved in that. And so our School of Engineering was actually doing work with Jaguar Cars, Alcan, and others on changing what had gone on before. What had gone on before was essentially pushing work in process onto the floor. It was all about optimization. Why is that machine idle? Get that machine working. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars or pounds, whatever it is, get it working. Why is Joe standing around? Why isn't he being productive on this? Get him on the machine. So we built up this massive amount of work in process, which now seems laughable, but at the time, that's what was happening. If you went to Jaguar Cars when Ford bought them, it was a nightmare. But that's some of the work that we through this professor were able to get glimpses of. We became a Jonah school. So Jonah schools, not many people know this, but at the beginning, to get the word out, to spread the word in organizations, you had to turn around and you had to understand that you're pulling materials through a factory, you're not pushing them. Sounds so fundamentally obvious. And that's what we did. And that was why I believe that's exactly how I ended up in the United States, because that first company that I joined, it was all about that. It was all about how do you operate an organization based on pull as opposed to push, and theory of constraint planning. Very, very boring to some, but the foundations of that really went into ERP systems, and that's where I too came in. But the problem, Joel, is that I don't think ERP systems got any love and attention in decades. I don't think things have fundamentally changed in SAP or Oracle or NetSuite. Um, and the problem comes is because of implementation. Nobody ever really saw the true value of those ERP systems because implementations failed at alarming rates. Alarming rates. They never got to them. They never saw the value in the actual planning as discussed in the goal.
Couple of things for people that haven't read The Goal. You're referencing Jonah School. Jonah's a character in that book, and one of the brilliant things that Goldratt did in that, it shouldn't work. Like if somebody would have pitched me a book like this, I would have been like, "This is
Yeah,
silly. Don't write it this way." But the entire book is novelized, and so there's a story. There's a whole subplot about him, his marriage problems
sure.
as the lead engineer or the kind of like problem solver is trying to figure things out, but it makes it extremely easy to read. And so it sounds like, that book came out. I don't have the published date right in front of me, but right around the time you're coming into school, and it really was a different way of thinking. It's
Yeah,
probably, I would argue, not as well known, but equally and probably right around the same time as Kaizen and the Toyota manufacturing
100%.
process and Kanban. Like those were kind of the two big
Yep.
moments in the 80s and 90s where in manufacturing in particular, people went, wait, we're approaching this wrong. But to go to what you're saying, and I've seen this in a few jobs that I've had, ERP systems, it feels like often get implemented by a third party vendor, and like happens with your Bains and Bostons and McKinseys, while you may have very smart people that get brought into a problem, they kind of have a playbook. And one of the ways that it goes wrong and why they have consulting firms have bad reputations is that they try to run their playbook that they know against a new problem, and they miss a lot of the opportunities. It sounds like that's kind of what you're saying about ERP. It has value at the top level, but the people implementing it don't always like bring the value out in the implementation.
I actually think it's the stage before that, and that's why I was on the sharp end of the spear with some really good folks. Um, when you see the sales organizations, who do they go and talk to? They're looking for decision makers. They're looking for the gatekeepers. They have to deal with the people, So it starts with requirements documents. They have to deal with people on the shop floor. But what I always love doing is literally going onto the shop floor because I understood that it was my cultural safe space because of my background. And so you go and talk to them, and actually, what they need from the system is actually not what the decision makers are wanting from the system. So you already end up with this clash. And it didn't matter whether it's SAP, the old Tetra systems in the UK. You already had built in resistance because the people didn't feel like they were being listened to in the requirements document. Why was that? Well, because McKinsey or PwC, Accenture, whoever wrote the requirements documents that was given to the cozy Oracles or the SAPs, they'd already discounted. So the people had already built up this internal resistance. We're going to have the SAP or Oracle shoved down our throat. It doesn't matter whether it's you could do it with Odoo, NetSuite. So I think there's fundamental resistance. So what do you go for? This was true in implementations. I saw it over and over again in mid-tier and larger companies. You would have people that, oh well, what's the easy one? Well, let's get finance involved. Oh, it's always the financial director, who's going to push this. So you get the general ledger, then you get AP, then you get sales. Well, what do you need? You need inventory, right? So you look at this, and then lower on down the line in manufacturing, you know, they may not have had a good say in what goes into that platform. They're being told, well, you've got to now use SAP's model of operation for this type of discrete business. That's where the resistance. So the actual implementation level to a certain stage is quite high. Where it all fell apart, and actually, quite candidly, I got disillusioned with, was we never helped the people. We never really helped the people on the shop floor. Therefore, you never really got the data flowing up. It's a really strange thing, but I saw it right at the front of the coalface. And I really don't think Silicon Valley hasn't really touched ERP. Larry Ellison bought NetSuite to have a lower entry model. But I'm sorry, I'm probably rambling, but
This is
this
good.
is near and dear to my heart because I see who was it on X the other day? Zane. Zane puts out, "Oh, I'm gonna."
I saw
Did
that.
you see that?
Yeah.
Uh, he puts out, "Oh, I'm gonna go for an ERP system. What have you got? What do you?" And that's where we're at. People don't know, and they have ERP branded for something, but they should really focus on the R and the P, which is the resource and the planning, because everything else is bread and butter. That doesn't matter.
Even if this is just a podcast for us, this is fine. Because I will tell you a couple of experiences that I've had in my career in this vein. One is that, um, so Alex, who's going to be joining us in a bit, Alex and I are corporate strategists, for lack of a better term, right? But really, what we are is fixers. We're problem solvers.
Right.
And one of the things that we do, which is a discipline that we brought our from like our journalist days, is, and it drives our clients crazy sometimes when we ask or require to do this, is often we'll get brought in to fix a problem. And I would say we're amazing at, immodestly, at having our first guess probably is often the
Right.
simple majority of the time we're right. Like we can analyze very quickly, and that has a lot of utility. But what we still do after that first guess is ethnographies or interviews, whatever you want to call them.
Right.
But we talk to every single person as close to a one-to-one if we can, depending on the size of the company, every single person working at the company. And it's not just because of a sort of empathy for the wisdom of the people who are getting their hands dirty, although there's an element of that. Like more often than not, the solution to the problem, and I had an instinct of this before I read Goldratt's book, but I think it's why I'm such a fan of it, is it validated my instinct in a way with
Right.
somebody with a lot more experience. If you can have the idea of saying this is the top level problem we're trying to solve. Sometimes that's not right either, which is a whole
Yeah.
other question. But you can at least go all the way through it. And often what you're trying to do is, yes, talk to the person that's running the lathe, to use an example, and figure out where their blockers are. But another element of it is making sure the person who's running the lathe in this example knows why, like what the company's top level mission and
Yeah.
outputs are. And that, from a management consulting standpoint, is something that I have seen over and over again when I've been airdropped into organizations, is that things that a lot of people, and startups are terrible at this, or most of them are, things that are like internal communications that people roll their eyes at because they're usually poorly done. And it's like, who wants to read a
Mhm.
newsletter and send it out or whatever? I get that. But it's like, what is your job as a leader is so often to have like 3 sentences that you say over and over again to the entire company so that people understand the mission. And then when they're going, I make 40 widgets a day and they're asking me to make 50, I can at least understand why we need to make 50 and how that's going to make the company stronger and my life easier. And you have to do that up and down. The other thing, and this has come up on the podcast a couple of times too, which is Conway's law, which I will mangle the phrasing of, but basically, your product always ends up reflecting the structure of your organization. And so it's more of a software element, but
Yeah, yeah,
I think it can apply to a lesser degree to physical good manufacturers, which is sometimes you can say, hey, I need an ERP system because I'm looking for tracking and efficiency and I need to just monitor where things are at. But you've also got to look at the structure of your organization and say, do we have manufacturing, for instance? Is our line like completely separated over here? Well,
right.
then maybe that's why our end product isn't resonating with customers as much as we wanted to. So really all of that is to say this isn't boring to me. I love this stuff. Like to me, this is the kind of stuff that yeah, it
Yep.
can get jerk offy to use a professional term,
Yeah, very
but
professional, yeah,
but it's like to me, this is part of the job. Like if you have a vision and you want to
yeah.
bring a company or a product to market, like you gotta be excited about this kind of stuff because that's part of like solving it.
If you're not excited by the ERP system that you're about to purchase, or a piece of equipment, a lathe, a Haas machine, whatever it is, if you don't understand as a leader of that organization, its place in there and it's just another, line item, just a capital line item, I think those leaders uh, are sorely missing the point. I think so you touched on a really, well, several things in that I think are near and dear to my heart. I remember going into Jaguar Cars in Coventry, which was just down the road, and I'll explain why Britain in large part failed because of a them and us mindset. Now, that's to do with the class system and it's all to do with all sorts of things. But one of the things that I saw in Jaguar cars, you would literally have guys building at the time, they were XJ6s. So Ford was implementing a new line, putting robots in. But you still had a couple of the old guard. And I'm talking there must have been 55, 60 that had to get themselves into the back end of an XJ6 and put two bolts together, right? Or bolts on. I've seen guys on that line, the last thing they wanted to see was a bunch of 20 somethings coming along with clipboards and notepads again. We weren't doing time studies, and at that point, and I saw a guy just kick the door. Right, so there's a door in a rack, probably the sort of racks that Zane is building at Delta 70, and I just looked and the frustration on these guys' faces. This is probably one of the biggest things that I would love to see change, and it's a cultural change. I saw it then and I see it now. The lesser than, somebody who's on the shop floor is lesser than. Those guys that were coming down were no different than Jeff Bezos putting loud hailers and speakers inside the Amazon fulfillment warehouses where they will literally shout at people. It was the same sort of culture that I saw going on at Jaguar and other plants in the UK way back when. So it's about the culture, and it hasn't changed. And I'll give you an example, just a very quick example. I'll come back onto ERP because you cannot be successful at any implementation of ERP unless and until you understand and put in place the right things that the goal touches on. I have a very successful friend here, acquaintance, friend. He's incredibly successful, runs a hedge fund. But we went to dinner and he was explaining that he's now become a CEO of a renewable batteries company. And it's like, what the hell are you doing? What's up with that? So he's ended up owning the majority of this company, and he went to 3 meetings. Now, bear in mind, this guy also has some very humble roots, very, very humble roots. He had 2 meetings. He'd got somebody, I won't say the names of the companies, but he got somebody out of a very, very well-known manufacturing company. And it was on the third time that he heard her say, well, if I have to, I'm going to go and see the Oompa Loompas downstairs and see what we have to do. My point being, that culture has not changed until and unless we see the value in everybody and what it means to have a blue collar job, the honor of doing blue collar work, as it's called. Maybe we need a different term. Those people that are picking things out of robotic baskets at the FBA for Amazon, I bet are not treated any differently. They're the necessary step before the humanoid robot does the work of picking out of that basket. It's the last of the line, and we often can't treat people like that. And until and unless we change that culture, reindustrialization, whether or not you're supporting it with ERP or not, it could be paper. There's a lot to be said for T cards, by the way, and really smart people. You can take a lot of quote unquote unqualified people. They can figure out a T card rack to do your scheduling real well. Not recommending it, but they can. And that's part of what 67 Designs for me is about. Is at a particular point in time, can we stand up a company and can we transfer knowledge from old guard to the new guard who have no exposure because we've lost a generation on how to make things. Why did we lose a generation? Because we treated people that were in manufacturing, whether they were in the Rust Belt of Detroit or in Garland, Texas, we treated them as a commodity to be thrown on the dust heap. That's what I came into in 1994, was going to factories in Garland to work for Oracle. You'd go and see them. They had no idea, and we had no idea that they were literally being hauled off their jobs. There was one company in particular. We went 1 week, we went back actually 3 weeks later, gone. All of it lifted, sent to China. Every one of those people that we interviewed on the first visit, great people, done.
But I want to jump in to something, Gavin, you were just saying about workers and blue collar and respecting that. I was so mad in the last week. I believe it was Mark Cuban jumped
Sure.
said something offhand, and I'm generally a fan of Mark Cuban. I think he's a pretty good orthogonal thinker, and he'll challenge things when they need to be challenged. But he had that default thing. I think Diamandis said something in the last 2 weeks about this as well, where they were like, manufacturing's never coming back to the US, just accept it. And the thing that I think is so silly about it, even though I'm pro automation, and I think I'm actually like fairly optimistic about humanoid
Yeah,
robotics, although
me too.
we'll
Me
we'll
too.
see.
I'm excited.
Uh, but it is this thing which is I have never understood in my lifetime. I'm 47. It seems like almost all corporate manufacturing and optimization has been from financial modeling first
Yep.
and presumed that there is no value in having a trained, passionate, involved workforce actually on the lines making things. And the thing coming from consumer electronics and sort of a consumer lens on a lot of that stuff is when I see that, I go, well, that's why everything's terrible. Like,
Sure.
that's why the products are so bad, is because there's the care is just being diluted at every step of the way. And I think it is asinine that we are telling ourselves we'll never build stuff in the US ever again because we don't have enough workers or we can't afford to pay them. Figure it out. Like just figure it out. Like, it's crazy to me that a priori we're just going, well, that's not something that can ever be solved. Hi,
I,
Alex. You're catching us both in high dudgeon.
Hi, Alex. I think one of the, just to respond to that, the simple reality for me is that I'm running a consumer products company and it's small. We have been attacked mercilessly by serial counterfeiters out of not the great state of Ohio, in my opinion. We can go back and we found some of the groups out of there liable for fraud and deceptive trade practices, and that could be a whole different podcast for educating innovators on not being too successful, as I mentioned the other day with Ben Coleman. But I'm very optimistic. The reason I started the business, as I said, is because transfer knowledge from an older generation to a younger generation, because we cannot continue down the path of outsourcing. But yeah, I've had a young lady who worked for me for 5 years. She told a professor at the local university, "Oh, I'm going to go into manufacturing." Well, what are you manufacturing? Phone mounts. Phone mounts for military vehicles, phone mounts for overland vehicles, for cars, for boats, anywhere. And the professor just turned around and said, "Well, that's stupid, right? That's stupid. You should do that in China. You should just get it made in China." That's what we're dealing with, is we're gonna have a legacy for now 2 generations where people think that that's all you do. And, no, I'm really optimistic on the reindustrialization as long as we have 3 core components: educational reform, legal reform, and supply chain reform. We get those 3 legs on the stool, we got a chance. If we don't, then we will not be the first civilization in the world to reverse from being a consumer economy into a production economy again. And by the way, we've only gone down to 11% of our GDP is from manufacturing. So there's still a ton of manufacturing. But if we don't rebalance that, um, then no, we will not be able to defend ourselves. We're already at that point. We're already at the point where we don't have materials. We have to go begging to the very enemy that we may have to use the materials on, right? How asinine is that? Didn't work for the Romans.
You alluded to it, but tell people your philosophy behind 67 Designs, because you have the consumer front. If somebody goes looks at the website, you can see what products you're making. But you have that idea of, from my understanding, you created it to be able to do a generational skill transfer and all of that. So, like, why was that, or actually, really more how? Like, how is that structured? The company structured to be able to do that.
Really, we're not structured any differently. It goes to what you said earlier. Are you saying three times over, three times a day? You know, we focus on quality. We focus on caring for each other. You know, very flat organization. We're a small organization, a very flat organization. But do you care for each other? Do you care for the customer? And do you deliver for the customer in a way that, you know, you're treating them like you wish to be treated? It's really, really, really simple model, simple structure. But I actually never the right place to start a business, but I actually decided to come back off of the software world and going in and out of a CT machine. And I said, well, whatever time I have left, I'm going to start a manufacturing company. How asinine was that? No, it's not. But that's how I started it, and that was the genesis. And I wanted to take yeah, that was a genesis. And so, yes, we have a for-profit consumer business, consumer products business, but the social mission, which I can blame on people like Dutch Leonard in Cambridge for that. I believe in the social mission has to be behind something. You can rally an awful lot of people, even lower down in the organization, doing what seems like small tasks. Behind that, that we're doing something for community and we're putting money back in the economy versus sending it to China.
So, tell me about what it's like to be a small manufacturer in the age of Amazon and China and knockoffs and all of that. Because I know you've had problems with knockoffs of your product, and
Sure.
it hasn't just been from China.
Oh, I actually don't think China's the real problem. There you go. I've said it. Um, I genuinely do not think that China is the problem at this stage or the greatest inhibiting factor for reindustrialization in the United States. And by the way, I isolate it to the United States because I believe that Europe is actually lost. They will not come back. China, I do not believe, is the core problem. It is the cancer within. We have a culture all the way up to federal judges, and I've seen it on the stand, all the way through attorneys that have no grasp of what it means for somebody that's earning $20 an hour versus $1,200 an hour. You know, obviously that's their billing rates, but earns a considerable amount of that. I think we have a cultural problem that needs to be reversed, and that is going to require probably prison sentences for those people that acquire products knowingly and willfully in order to ship them to China into factories to re-import them onto Amazon.
I mean, double click it, like restate it.
Yeah.
What you're saying is effectively, we have a culture here that is, as I probably easily framed as one of greed, where people are shamelessly ripping off other products, figuring out how to clone them and get them done en masse. And that there was a time when there were legal protections that would prevent that, and now, for the last X amount of years, that's just gone completely out the window. What does that look like for a small manufacturer to put all the R&D and the capex to stand something like this, a company up, and know that even your fellow American companies can take it from you?
I think there's an old phrase, well, there's two phrases I want to use in response to that. The first is, show me the incentives and I'll show you the man. Yeah, I think let's just focus on that. The incentives are so strong, and let me put this into real terms, real dollars. What it costs us $22 to make a phone holder that impacts the lives of 22 Americans in the construction thereof, right the way through from extrusion, right? Extrusion, machining, and all the other things, anodizing that goes into it. What is for us $22? We sell it for $50, so the margins aren't great. And that may sound like a lot, but it's really not. Certainly not enough to sell through resellers or on Amazon or anybody. Our competitor is buying in for $4 landed, perhaps $3. And I'm giving you information that isn't part of any legal disclosure to us. That's actually available for you to see in the public realm, even on Alibaba, because some of their manufacturers are selling the products directly from Alibaba. When you see the margins, so here's how it works and why we were targeted. Number one, we weren't the first. We were one of many. The one before us was Spiderweb Shades, a Florida company, and Chris had built that up again in the Jeep market. And they got attacked and it was created by the same guy, Alien Web Shade, that appeared on Amazon. Chris never recovered. He's still producing good products in it, but it's for niche, but he never fully recovered. We were next in line, and we were in line because we're producing a premium product and they could buy it. They engaged in their first fraud by actually Pedro, who worked for us at the time, sent an email to the guy in late 2018 and said, "Hey, there's a lot of the same products. Did you mean to order these?" The guy wrote back and said, "Yeah, they're for gifts." That was his first engagement fraud because on a federal stand, on the stand in federal court, he admitted that that's all he wanted to do is ship it to China. And that was the extent of his research and development.
To be copied.
100%. In fact, the phraseology is exactly. And so it's stunning, and I would love to share this with as many young innovators as possible. I'm partway through a book, but the reason I can't finish the book is I don't have the arc going up. That's the reality. As I sit here on the phone with you or on this podcast, I don't quite have the ending, but I encourage everybody to do it because we are pre-wired. I think humans are pre-wired to innovate. We are pre-wired to solve problems. You can see this, otherwise people wouldn't be buying 3D printers for their house. They're 3D printing gadgets all over their house. I think we're pre-wired for it. I think we got to continue. I'm very optimistic that we're going to put the tools in place in the US and we're going to get America making things again, as long as we can also change some of the mindset around management thinking and really embrace the people that are actually doing the work and really care for those people, really care for them.
There are times when people have asked me, "Hey, I've got this great new idea. I think I can start a company. Uh, should I patent it, my idea?"
Yeah.
And, of course, the default is, I can't remember what the current numbers are, but 25 grand, something like that. It's like just to do that is going to be a huge amount of money for most people.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, it's like a trademark. Just registering it doesn't necessarily protect you. You still have to go to court and enforce it. The government isn't going to automatically provide oversight for those things. And that's why often, and I think this is the current age of small business and manufacturing or consumer goods, is you protect it by growth and scale, which is largely marketing and branding and all of those things, so that you
Sure.
are at least the default. And then on the back, you just figure out how to get the margins and manufacturing done all you want. The problem with that, if it's not obvious to everyone, is that that always will default back to usually offshoring and certainly outsourcing your manufacturing. And so it is always reducing that back to taking the skills and the high quality jobs and all of those things off of the out of the US, because the only way to grow is to continue to grow. And that can work for a software company, that can work for a lot of things that are outside of atoms, but it doesn't work for atoms. Like, how would you suggest that people, they want to make a new water bottle design? Like, what steps do you feel like are the baseline right now to do an American-based manufacturing product to protect yourself legally for the people that are going to try to rip you off, including Amazon?
Yeah, and bear in mind, Amazon, unless you get into basics, are not the one. So I think it's a case of, again, this goes back to education reform. You'll be shocked at how many people do not even understand the prosecution process for patents, trademarks, etc. So if I can, I'll tack on a little bit because I think it may be useful for your viewers to hear about that. And then also the litigation experience and talk about that in connection with intellectual property that we did obtain. First of all, you can do this. You can start doing this in a garage. People are running print farms, starting with one printer, and they're coming up with products. I was with an influencer yesterday, one of our customers at a local airport. He's building a plane, and his name's Trent Palmer. Awesome guy. I'm standing there. Some of our equipment is being fitted in the plane, but Trent walks in, and he's a product guy. At his heart, he's a product guy. He's awesome. He goes and puts two 3D printed parts on the wing to hold his one wheel, right? I go up and it's a TPU flexing. It's maintaining the control lines are clear. I think there are people creating products all the time. So do it. Just do it. The trouble is, and I can speak to this, when we went from 2015 to 2018, we had a 284% compound annual growth rate. That's insane. We could not keep product on the shelf. That puts you into target zone. So once you're in target zone, once you use the tools which are available, like I'm not going to even say the names. I don't want to encourage bad behavior, but you've got playbooks by all of these counterfeiters that are sitting there. They're using tools and they can actually record what people are looking for on Amazon. And companies like ours that were not on Amazon deliberately, they were able to pick off and say, well, they can't satisfy it here. They're barely satisfying it. We used to put product up on a Sunday night. We're sold out by Tuesday, right? It was that insane. So there's lots of tools available to be picked off. I don't think there's anything going to stop anybody from attempting to do that, as I said, short of prison sentences. I really do. I've sat opposite these guys in a court of law. They are the sociopath next door. If you haven't read that book, you should read it, because they're the sociopaths in that book that have got no qualms, no empathy, no care for the blue collar worker. As long as they can turn a buck and run it through a 3PL, they're good to go. If they never touch that product, they're good to go. Take someone else's R&D. So let's talk about R&D or protections. My longest patent that I prosecuted took over 10 years. That took over $250,000. The Chinese did something very cunning to our system. They told the Chinese people and the Chinese engineers to go and file patents in the United States. As we put pressure on China to spool up their intellectual property and to take serious, they turn around, whether it was Whispering Grasses or the 50 Cent Network, they turn around and then filed a massive amount of patents. But they did so without attorneys. So what did the American Bar Association do? They were able to lobby and say, no, they've at least got to be represented by American lawyers. So that blunted this. But what we ended up with was the Chinese effectively shoved a buffalo down the snake of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And ever since then, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office has been attempting to consume that buffalo. Well, what happened? If you're an American innovator today, you could be looking, as we have done, to design a product in 2020, and you do not get your first office action, in other words, your first response with the rejections, until 2022. So what are you going to do for the first 2 years? You've created a better mousetrap. Do you sit and do you wait until you can get some protections? Because putting patent pending or registering on a website is BS. Most people don't know that.
Yeah, it's a target.
It's a target. So that's really the catch-22. And I've got countless stories from other people that have been victims that they've literally even worked with Chinese manufacturers. They've sent them the drawings, and the drawings then became applications inside the Chinese Patent and Trademark Office, and they were issued faster than they got an initial response. And when they got the initial response, they were rejected because the prior art that was claimed was Chinese, which was off of their very product. You cannot make this crap up. This is reality. So what would I advise young people? Think about trade secrets. There's a he's a quite a well-known individual, lives in these parts, who he owns, he's a part owner of a space company. They don't even bother for patents anymore. They don't bother for patents. They regard it all as trade secrets, because here's the dirty element of this. I don't know whether, is this educational? I don't know whether it's educational.
Very, very.
When you put a patent application together, and you can ignore, by the way, Just if any attorney says to you, let's do a design patent, they're quick and dirty. Throw it out the window and find another attorney. You need a utility patent if you're going to get a patent. Here's what happens. At the end of 6 months, if you've checked the box that says, I want to be protected in China or Europe, at the end of 6 months, everything that is in your specification, all your diagrams, everything, all of your claims is made public. You are literally, I know people in the chemical industry are no longer filing patents relating to chemicals because our patent and trademark office are not able to digest what's coming at them. Therefore, the time frame is greater than 6 months. So if you get an attorney convince you to do a utility patent and you want to put $250,000, these are not cheap endeavors. You don't get a lot for $1,200 an hour, let me tell you, from an attorney. And that's not disrespecting attorneys. That's just, it takes time. You should be expecting that your innovations will be picked off because we have a very open public system in our country, and your designs will appear on Amazon through no fault of your own, but because you decided you wanted to get a utility patent. And it's going to take 2 years, maybe a year for their first office action. Because of our treaties and etc., the world's already got it.
I mean, these systems that we built in the post-world order are almost always, not always, but almost always were for well-intentioned, right?
Of course.
But it reminds me, as you're saying this, literally when I just think about construction and the EPA and oversight and the big dig and how long, or to build the West Side subway, the current budget just to extend what was already built is like $75 billion or something. And it's what we're running up into culturally now. And I say this highly skeptical of like Doge and a lot of the slash and burn, the actual implementation of what is happening right now. But I believe very much in the need for reform in these things because we have too many rules. And I fall afoul of this all the time in some of my own business endeavors where I'm like, well, there's a way to do it. So let me go tick the boxes and do it. And then I find that I've spent all of my brain's energy and effort in just following the rules when what I should have done is maybe not even incorporated and just got a product to market and maybe figured out any legal ramifications of that later. That is one element that comes from the Valley style startup culture.
Yep.
Uber,
Yep.
all of these things
100%.
that Alex and I have run into in our like career that was heavily automotive influenced, which is, man, if you're a good person that's trying to be a good citizen, you want to follow the rules because you understand why those rules are there. But it is also reality to be able to look at the system itself and say, I may not be able to even get to step 2 if I follow every single one of those rules. So what gets me to step 2 first and then work backwards from there in the most ethical way?
So if that's the path that you choose, and I agree with everything you've just said, if that's the path you choose, then you're going to be the sociopath next door, and all you're going to do today is turn around. No, I mean it. You're going to be those scumbags, those pirates. I mean, they're literally on the open seas, looking for the next target. They're looking for the next, brig to go and attack. Whether or not it's a 60, tomorrow it's going to be something else. I mean, and the system rewards that. And so the bigger question is, are we going to run out of the innovators that are just going to give up and say it isn't worth it? And that's truly what I worry about, is that if you are not able to machine something, if you don't know how it's made today, you cannot improve on it tomorrow. That's a really fundamental way of thinking for me. And it goes down to, as much as, your jacket there, Alex, I don't know, you may have I'm just looking, you may have a zip that's a particular waterproof type zip. The Chinese are doing things, and they're so much more advanced than us in so many ways in and around manufacturing now. Because as we've been gutting ourselves for 40 years, thanks to professors, policymakers, boards, raiders, etc., they've been improving. And they've been competing against each other. And they're really good. They're really good. They know how to do things that we don't know. I've seen it in the factories in Shenzhen. I've seen it. They're doing things that we literally do not know how to do. So when we were doing even more in the United States, looking for even better finishes, I went around companies, they say, yeah, we don't know how to do that. And the classic is, oh, well, they can do that because they don't have the EPA. I don't buy that either. They have just learned how to evolve differently. And we need to get to a point where I'm saying I'm on a soapbox. I don't wish to.
It's okay. This whole thing's a soapbox.
We've got to get people to know how to make things before they just go one step too far, and then we're completely up shit creek. And that's I'm sorry to use that language, but we're done at that point, and we're close.
No, you're tapping into something that I haven't been able to figure out a way to synthesize it. I am not right wing, but in my career, I have run into the sociopath over and over again.
Hmm.
And because I am a little bit on the spectrum and a pretty good distiller of concepts, I keep finding myself going, well, the rational choice is for me to be a sociopath or act as if
Yeah,
I were a sociopath.
100%.
And the thing that I is giving me life right now is that out of all of the things that politically, the country's very fractured, a lot of things that we don't agree on, manufacturing and building things inside the US to me has so many inarguable values that are left and right values. Like they
Yep,
may not always
100%.
completely dovetail, but if we want national pride in a healthy way or in a jingoistic way, either way, service more by producing things that we can be proud of. Do we want better economy and better jobs and job security? And do we want to be able to not have so many people rely on Social Security? Well, guess what? If we had more thriving companies with pensions, maybe that wouldn't have to happen as much. The challenge I think now, and I think for those of us that are within the set of the kind of current wave of reindustrialization, it feels like something's really happening and there is a movement and it's real, but it's like we are still just a tiny little minority compared to the overall culture of business and the workforce within the US, which I don't think ultimately believes this is even possible. And I think that's why like Cuban's statements really got my goat as much as they did, because I'm like, how can you not even be debating if it is possible or trying to figure it out? People have just given up. We can't give it up. If we give it up, it's over for the country. Like we have to have these elements intrinsic to our culture.
So I first met Mark Cuban, and he presented to the Southwest Venture Forum on the day that he announced his sale to Yahoo. We had been working with Broadcast.com down in Deep Ellum, and we knew the infrastructure. We knew that what he was selling. I've always had not the most positive view of Mark Cuban, and that's just putting it out there. And I saw his post the other day, but I thought it was fairly typical. I thought that was fairly typical of Mark. I don't think he's particularly deep in his thinking. I think and I'm not being personal, I'm talking from a business point of view. But then I tried reconciling that a few weeks before at SMU, I'm looking at a stage and there's 5 people all telling the story of how they went on Shark Tank. And every one of them was backed by Mark Cuban. And I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but Mark Cuban invested um, in a company that is right now at the very heart of reindustrialization. So at the end of that session, it was a really small group of folks. I went down and I talked to the CEO who's reindustrializing. He's an awesome guy. He's right at the heart of it. He is in an industry battling where 95% of the products, listen to this number, 95% of the products that are being made in his category are made in China for the rest of the world. He is one of the few that is standing up an American manufacturing company in the Midwest and is really committing because he understands and he really cares and he's got a product that people want. And in that room, people didn't know who was really going to attend. In that room, people were saying at the end, "What you've done is you've created a product that has literally helped keep our children safe." And he's building it in the United States. I'm more bullish now than I've ever been. I've seen 40 plus years of gutting first the UK and Europe, certainly the UK, and then the United States. We are in the best position, and I firmly believe with educational reform, I'm going to say it again, educational reform, legal reform for all the things we spoke about, and then supply chain reform where we can get mineral pricing, lowest level pricing to be able to compete, I think we're going to be in great shape. And we've got really great minds, and there's a really good batch of young people that may or may not have had any manufacturing in their background that are really coming to the fore, including the people that he makes me laugh every day, Zane, with his posts. Let him be the poster child, and we're just this far in a long journey.
We need Zoomer energy. But Bill Gurley, another thinker that made a lot of money in software, and I appreciate his perspective. On a podcast about a month ago, he had an offhanded comment where he said manufacturing will never come back, and he gave a specific example where he said the U.S. will never be able to build, I believe he said, a $40 microwave. And it stuck in my craw because of the default reason, but I was like, I'm not sure that's even right. And so I've started trying to track
Ah,
down what microwaves are built in the US, and it turns out there are several microwaves still being built in the US, and they're not $40. They tend to be around 80 at the very low end. But guess what's also $80 at the low end? All the microwaves built in China or Korea or somewhere else. He just had the price point wrong. In the reindustrialization movement now, that denotes a very clear next step, which is just straight up a messaging problem, which is people have the core opportunity and realities wrong. So we need to reestablish what the realities are. Guess what? Whirlpool, Amana, I believe it's their microwave department. Like, they still have a giant factory. They're still making microwaves. You can still buy a made in America. I believe Panasonic, even though that's a Japanese company, makes microwaves in the US. Like, buying American and seeing what is available in America now, even though that sounds like a catchphrase from the 80s, it's still applicable. It still matters now. And that's what everybody that's trying to keep this movement growing should be focusing on, which is, yeah, let's talk to each other,
yep.
support each other, train each other up, but also make sure that the external messaging is very clear as well.
So how do you do that? It's a serious question back to you. When you've got an Amazon, so you can go and buy a phone mount to compete, that competes against us. I mean, we are operating at the higher end because we got a higher performance product. We've got probably north. I would suspect. I do not trust Amazon's numbers. They claim, oh, we're only 45%. I think that they have monopoly in the US. I would suspect that probably close to 75%, 70% of all online trade in the United States is going through the Amazon platform. That's a monster claim. I have nothing to back it up with. We've been speaking to some retail consultants that are seeing the real impact of Amazon in places in the Midwest like Iowa or Des Moines, brick and mortar stores that can't compete. I have to believe that Bezos is on a run rate that is absolutely it's worse than Standard Oil in its heyday. Because but that's the default. We all go to it. We all have to buy products from it. We're all hypocrites. So the question comes to that point with microwaves. How many of those components are actually coming in from China and then it's final
Sure.
assembly? But I think that's okay. I mean, we still have to buy products from China. And I love our Chinese vendors. And that's straight up, that's the truth. They deliver on time. The quality is where it needs to be. So we still have to buy some low-level components that go into our products. But I think we can start with saying, okay, we can do assembly work. We can take people into an environment, into a company, be it Panasonic or wherever, and we can intermingle our people in the manufacturing process. You know why? Because in the grand scheme of it, the labor rate is almost nothing for most products. Where the real issue is material costs. The real issue, Scott Meyer gets this and others. You have these politicians or people that go on to Bill Maher say, oh, slave labor. Give me a break. This is a material issue. We're a material supply chain issue, not a labor issue. And we can provide really good jobs to people, even if they're putting some Chinese made components. And over time, we will go up the food chain. Just like China's been going up the food chain for well over a decade, we need to perhaps go and reset ourselves, assemble as much as we can here, have pride in that, engineer that, and then we will start to machine even more of what goes into it as we get scale.
You asked the question, what would we do to pursue the messaging discipline of this? Like, how do we make this a cultural issue? That's a whole other podcast. This is a lot of what Alex and I solve for our clients is like distilling a message and then figuring out how to get attention. But what you just said is a super critical part. In all honesty, don't feel like I've seen a ton of this in the reindustrialization movement, but I think it's a really key part of it, which is learn from the left and the Democrats and their mistakes, which is purity will not get us to the next step. If you have a sickness, which America has a sickness, like we outsourced a huge part of our labor, manufacturing, raw material space. You cannot turn around tomorrow and expect for that all to be there. We're going to have to rely on trade partners. We're going to have to
Absolutely.
rely on external components. We should not be in the situation where we are saying, if you buy something from an American final finish company, but 50% of its BOM is from overseas, that's a problem. That's not a problem. It's headed in the right direction.
Correct.
And so I think making that distinction clear is a really big point. And while I like Palmer and a lot of the Anduril guys, I wish that defense tech wasn't like the most recent big example of this. I think those US-based manufacturing companies that are hitting scale and successful and even going public, I think it is incumbent on them. And I think Palmer and Anduril are doing this a lot. I think they're going to have to tell that message too, because it really is to a certain extent about archetypes. And we have an archetype of the last 30 years of how you become a billionaire is either through software or offshoring. And I think we have to have new archetypes of success to be able to say, I figured out how to build in America with American labor, and I made good jobs and good products and a shitload of money. And the people that are hitting the levels of success also have to do a lot of that messaging as well. Neither of those are silver bullets, but that comes to mind to me of like why things like Tool or Die, which, you know, we're tiny and we largely do this to talk to people like you and learn from people like you. But that's why everybody that is in this space is pointed in the same direction and needs to be saying these messages over and over again, because it's still very early days.
If I may, earlier you made a statement, and I don't want to quote you. I want to make sure I get it correct. That there needs to be prison time for the people
Yeah.
who don't do the R&D, who just buy product like yours, send it to China. That's easily understood that this could come from a place of frustration. But do you literally mean that is something which should happen?
First of all, it doesn't actually come from as much frustration as you might think. It comes from experience. So it's not a point of, oh, I've got to, score back, right? There's a much bigger game at play here than that, called saving the United States in the way that we approach things from a reindustrialization. No, from what I've seen, prison is the only thing that I think there's no civil. Let me back up the wagons. What are your choices? What are your choices, Alex? What does an entrepreneur do that has finite resources? Where do they go when they see a wrong has happened? And they're a little bit rhetorical. I know you may not, but you've got the FTC, Federal Trade Commission. We have laws on the books. We have the Lanham Act. We have all sorts of legislation relating to and case law relating to the use of the American flag. Our competitor, Upstart, who, by the way, I just want to point this out, actually on their website until the litigation used the phrase the same as 67 designs, but cheaper, because it literally was copied stuff, right?
Oh, wow.
You can't make this stuff up. The reality is you can't pull a string into our government and find success. You can file a claim on the FTC and nothing happens. So you got 7 panel, you got how many investigators, how much have they got to go through? I've got a friend going through this right now who manufactures product. He knows exactly what's going on. He's delivered facts and figures to the FTC and they've said, yeah, we're not taking it up. Who else have you got to go to? You're left back with the civil courts. My determination, this may be interesting to you, my determination was to not file patent infringement claims because they were twisting and ducking and diving quickly. Once we got them on a few things. Do you know what actually ended up is in federal court? We went to Amazon and used the Amazon brand registry, which you have to do And we turned around and said, these are our trademarks. Look at these listings. You determine, Mr. Amazon or Amazon, you determine whether or not our trademarks are being infringed. If you think they're being infringed, we request that you take the store down. They did. What did we get as a result? A lawsuit for tortious interference.
Mm.
Bully boy tactics by people that are thugs in the realm of counterfeiting. We have nobody to go to. The path to civil justice is nothing. What do? They get a rap on. The judge allowed them to sell $1.6 million worth of product with our designs on it, even though acknowledging that, yeah, they should stop. That's not justice. So for me, prison sentence, there has to be a very clear line in the sand that you should be able to go to a court and say, you're really going against the American flag. You put it on every product. You're using the American flag, invoking veterans and all the other things. You probably should go to jail for things like this because you're undermining what it is we're standing for, in my opinion. It happened to Germany. A few years ago, Harry's razor was all about we got German razors, right? It was all done in Ningbo. They had a few bits of metal coming out of Germany. Now you got something, you go made in Germany. You go, so what? Is that what we're going to have in the United States where people say, oh, made in America, but really it's not? I mean, it's all over Amazon. Are we going to stand up for the equivalent of champagne? The French are the only people that can call champagne champagne, right? We should be the only ones being able to call American made, American made. And if you don't, you probably should go to prison.
There is something about, and I wouldn't want this to be at like a government level, but there is something about being able to qualify or quantify what the specific percentage is that to me feels really good. There was a conversation with somebody in your industry actually that we had a few episodes ago who builds truck racks, Leitner Designs.
Yeah.
And I really
Exactly.
appreciated the fact that when I asked him point blank, and we're not like a star chamber here or anything, but I was just asking him like, okay, how much is US based and how much is it? And he's like, I'm misquoting it here, but he's like, I think probably like 96%. And it's like, I loved that because it was reality. It's like, I am aiming for 100. I'm at 94, 95%, but I'm also transparent about that with my customers so they understand where I'm at and they can't hide under the aegis of made in America without actually having some quantification of it. But you're also getting to the other cultural thing too, which again, I think is where the left and the right have to be able to see both sides of this, which is that if scale and money exempts you from consequence, then we're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
So there has to be consequence of some type, or there's no way to not just create a system for sociopaths where everything is gambling and everything is lawfare and real innovation and real growth and real sturdy bedrock of a civilization isn't encouraged. Like that, we're gonna suicide ourselves.
We're going to suicide ourselves for the very reasons that we've got technology now that we can operate at scale. You know, our surveillance technology in the United States and across the West, which rivals everything that China is doing with its social credit score and everything else like that. We're operating at a scale of surveillance that is the stuff of dreams for the Stasi in East Germany when I was growing up, right? So the same is true in the industrial side. We have intellectual property flowing around the United States into countries like India, China, Indonesia, you name your country, Canada even. Sorry, that's my little pop at Canada.
I
Sorry,
didn't even catch
sorry,
it.
sorry, Canadian customers. The reality is we've got intellectual property that's flowing out of this country by engineers and 1099 people that are looking in SolidWorks and going, click, and I'll print it. And they don't care where it comes from. To go back to your point, the FTC says about 50% of there is an integer value, the 50% or more. And if you were to look at our website, what we did is we need to update it. But most of our products, we even break down the percentage. So we'll put 75% or whatever it is. And if it's greater than 50% of the value of that item, then we will not have an American flag on it. But we put an American flag on our marketing listings. We don't put the American flag on many products. But we actually look and we audit ourselves constantly based on the value of this, what is American made? And are we living up to our ideals? Are we living up to our mission? Because if we're not doing that internally, what's the point?
On your website, you've got you have a list of kind of counterfeits. You point out discoloration or finishes wearing off. Are these things that people have bought thinking that they were 67 products and then sent to you thinking that you had a defective product and hoping you'd resolve it?
We had so many people buying product on Amazon in 2019, 2020. They would come to us for support, believing that they had bought 67 Designs product. Why? And this gets to the diversion of trade that Amazon is engaged in. They use keywords. We were never on there. So if you wanted a 67 Designs phone mount, you type in 67 Designs Jeep mount, it would show that the moment you click on it. And actually, what it is, it looks exactly the same. Why? Because they copied it exactly. These guys are really, on the one hand, they're the sociopath next door, but they're really smart. They're really so much smarter than I am in terms of marketing. And I give them all credit. They can, because why? Because they've got all this margin to go and spend on the marketing more than we do. Diversion of trade, Amazon's responsibility for that is the inhibitor.
Want to have you back sometime and get into that more. I will sum it up. If you want to contribute to the culture, to the nation, you got to take the harder path and you've got to have a sense of outputs and ethics. That also is going to involve reaching across the aisle. I don't know why this is getting so political. I'm not running for office
This
or
is
anything,
not
but
political.
but it is political in the sense of it has to be beyond like left, right, Republican, Democrat, of
Yeah.
all these things. And it is, and you alluded, Gavin, all the way back in the beginning, coming from the UK, you're more aware of this than a lot of you Americans are. It's a class issue too, which
Correct.
is we have to figure out how the majority of people align and what civilization we want to be living in and build together. And manufacturing isn't all of it. Reindustrialization isn't all of it. Education, there's a whole bunch of other elements to it. As a cranky, cynical, left-wing person, this is the first time in 20 years that I'm feeling some optimism because I feel like even though we're more divided than ever, which is also true, but there are certain things that I think that the vast majority of people are starting to look at and say, not just this needs to get better, but if this is going to be better, I'm going to have to make different decisions. And
Mhm.
that is how change can happen.
This has been the most informative, chilling, but also inspiring episode I think we've ever done. I really, really am grateful to you.
Come back on whenever you'd like. I want to talk about 67 Designs. I want to talk
No,
about
no
some of
mess
the
about that.
product stuff.
And you actually, Gavin, you've got at least one new customer now because I've got a racing team. Joel and I race every month or so, and we need a lot of mounts. So we will be in
Ec-
touch and
Excellent.
about purchasing some product. Thank you so much.
Thanks you, Alex. Thank you, John.